Good morning, everyone. I'm broadcasting from sunny San Pedro, Colombia on the week 9 topic for language and communication, and it's about gender bias in language. In this presentation, I'm going to look at English, and by the end, I'm going to encourage you for your work for the week to analyze some of the other languages that we speak in Belize, right? A language that you speak, because you'll be familiar with it, okay? So to link with what we did in week 7, languages do reveal a lot about people's belief systems, their political ideologies, their perceived social order. Languages are culture, right? Languages are part of culture, and that is why we are trying to protect languages, because we want to have our diversity of cultures. But also, if the language is biased, the culture becomes biased in various ways, right? And research has found, this is really new to me. I didn't know this before I started researching, and when I found it out, I was shocked. Wherever gender-biased languages are spoken, in those countries, women have been found to be more limited in their career choices, and they especially are less prominent in the field of science. And women tend to get paid less in places where the language creates that cultural lens, that cultural bias against women, right? And the UN is working on this. This is one of the things, just like how they are working on the endangered languages. They would like to close the gender gap sometime in the 2020s. But, you know, it makes us wonder, what exactly is a gender gap? I mean, we perceive it a little bit, I suppose, in our day-to-day work, but how is it quantified? And the answer would be, I found out, it's based on the education, the wages, the life expectancy, and the political participation of women versus men in a given country. It's done by country. So you can't quite see my question below, but I'll tell you anyway. Countries which have no gender gap, where women are completely equal in terms of education, wages, life expectancy, and political participation, countries like Iceland, get a score of 1, perfectly equal. And the question, which I'm sorry you cannot read real well, is, does Belize have a gender gap? And if you would like, you could just pause the video here and think about our education, right? Men versus women here, our wages, our life expectancy, and our political participation, and make a prediction. What do you think our gender gap would be? And is it different than, say, the United States or Guatemala, who has the biggest gender gap, right? Just interesting to make predictions based on what you know. And our answer here is Belize only gets 0.67. And I'm so sorry to say that Guatemala beats us with 0.68. And the United States also beats us, but not by much, with a 0.7, right? And this means that in the United States, the male college graduates make, for every dollar that they will make upon graduation, the female graduates will make 70 cents. The wage gap has not been really so well quantified for Belize, but I think it's fairly similar. It's between 65 and 74 cents for every dollar that the males make, right? And I think another thing that might be bringing our gender gap score down also is our problem with domestic violence, right? But anyway, and also our political system. We don't have very many female leaders, so we don't look good here in Belize, and courses like Language and Comm should work on that, because a lot of this has to do with our language that we speak. But this is a stat from the United States, so they're, you know, it's slightly different, but very similar. By the United States, in the US, girls already think that boys are more likely to show brilliance and are more suited to, quote, really, really smart activities than girls. This is what girls believe about themselves, that they are not very smart. So we are always, constantly, unconsciously communicating that women are less smart and less competent. But how are we doing this? And of course, the images in the textbook are one, but it's also built right into the English language. Amazingly, I did not realize this. And that brings us to the question, compared to other language, is English less gender biased or more? You could also pause and think about that for a moment if you want. From what you know of English, is there more bias or less than the other languages you know? Luckily, I have a multilingual class. Okay, so here are the categories. The less biased languages, the least biased languages, and also the languages that are the countries that usually have a better score with gender gap. There is no gender in the language. It only appears when it has to. The word women, sister, father, man, those are obviously gender languages, but there is no pronoun that shows. So the person walked across the street, he/she turned and looked at me. You could say that in a genderless language, and we would not know, unless we gathered it from the context, if you were talking about a male or a female, because the pronouns themselves have no gender. And the reason that I gave you this weird GIF on the side is that trans people love these languages the best, because in other languages, they always have a lot of discrimination and issues with, you know, she or he. Are you a she or a he? Oh, I just can't get my mind wrapped around it. Are you she? Are you he? You know, people just, it's limiting for us, right, in our gendered languages. But in a genderless language, it's easy for a trans because there is no he or she, right? So you know English is not genderless, okay? And then there are natural gender languages, and that is where English falls. Most nouns and their dependent forms, like the articles, the adjectives, and the pronouns, are both male and female. The only thing that is gender specific in our language are the personal pronouns like she, he, him, and her. Okay, so this is what we call natural gender languages. Okay, and then the last category is the most biased set of languages of all, and those are like Spanish, French, Italian, and German, where all nouns and all articles are feminine or masculine, and the adjectives have to match and be feminine or masculine also. La profesora, los papeles, la estudiante, those are clearly male or female. And in those languages, of course, when you have a group who are mixed male and female, just like in English, we use the male form to be inclusive of a group, right? So this would be the grammatical gender, right? Or gendered, we call them, the gendered languages, the la and el languages. Okay, so there are three types of languages. And even though English is not gendered, it's natural gender, remember, English does have another category that linguists look at, which is the distinguishing of masculine versus feminine qualities. And we do this in English a lot. So even though we are not gendered in English, we are still creating a kind of lens that we look at people through. Women are expected to be warm and cooperative and team players, and men are expected to be what they call agentic, meaning that they are in charge of things and they are agents, right? That is the type of words we use for male and female. And they really are. If you would look up the word gossip, for example, just Google it, just for fun, the images, you will see only pictures of women, right? In the English language, gossip, it's a female trait, although of course we know that men gossip just as much. Okay, so there have been a lot of studies in workplaces in the United States to look at the words that are used to describe female employees versus male employees. Female employees, when they are liked, when they are described well, are helpful, supportive, team players, and collaborative. And of course, when they are not liked, they might be described as gossips. Male workers who are valued innovate, and they have drive, and they transform, and they tackle. These are the kinds of words that are used. And of course, we would never accuse a male in English of gossiping. Managers use these positive words. This is another study, and I like this one because it's much more detailed. In descending order of frequency, what is the most important word that is used to describe men by managers? Analytical, competent, athletic, right? All of those are positive. Dependable is there, and then arrogant is the fourth most common word, right? Now, the women, if they are liked by the managers, they are described as compassionate, energetic, enthusiastic, and organized. But here are all the many, many, many words that are described, female employees are described with: inept, selfish, frivolous, passive, scattered, opportunistic, gossip. You see, these words are not in the study applied at all to the men, right? And you know that men can obviously be inept, selfish, frivolous, passive, scattered, opportunistic, and gossipy, but they are not normally done so. And that is something that is built right into the language. Derogatory comments about female politicians are 3 times most likely to reference their gender than those of male politicians. Female leaders tend to be referred to using the B word, which is of course a gendered word. And this is being seen right now. There's a really good example of this in the 2020 debates. I know that you all are tired of hearing me complain about Donald Trump, but just for an example, this is just objectively an example. In the 2020 debates, Kamala Harris was roundly criticized by the news media for making faces, lying, rambling, and not being warm, not being friendly, right? Yet President Trump has done all of these things in his debates, and the news media views him as decisive, aggressive, and a character. And I'd just like to show you all a little montage to prove that. And you'll notice that it is not just males who are threatened by Harris, but also females.
The only real mistake Kamala Harris made tonight was over-smirking, over-smiling.
She was just not prepared for it. You could see it in the facial expressions, in the attitude that she took.
I'm speaking, she barked again and again when Mike Pence tried to respond to her.
You interrupted me,
September 30th,
Are you going to apologize, Jeff? No.
I'm an elderly woman.
Let me talk. Quiet.
She could do a little more than make these awkward smiles and just shake her head.
I don't think she did a good job of making herself likable, and the scowls and the funny faces were not that helpful.
Those smirks and nods and eye rolls and
Those facial expressions and the way she behaved were really off-putting.
Well, not even the plexiglass could contain that strong side eye that Kamala Harris was giving the vice president.
Smug, smirking. It's not something Americans or regular people like.
What people took away from it was a bit abrasive, a bit condescending.
Don't ever use the word smart with me. Don't ever use that word. There's nothing smart about you, Joe.
Clearly, she blatantly lied over and over again.
Take a look at West Virginia, mailmen selling the ballots. They're being sold. They're being dumped in rivers. They want to take out the cows, too.
Her rambling, her disorganized answers, at times were even hard to watch.
Are you saying that what you said on that bus 11 years ago, that you did not actually kiss women without consent?
Nobody has more respect for women than I do.
So for the record, you're saying you never did that?
Things that, frankly, you...
For those who feel unfairly criticized for having inserted a video clip into their presentation, which I said was too long or intrusive, I would just comment that I inserted the video to demonstrate how news commentators' perception of Harris is not only partisan, but also represents a double standard for male and female communication. And it goes on to next the upcoming topics, because it's critical not only of her verbal communication, but also the nonverbal communication as well. And it gives us a question: if a woman ran for prime minister in Belize, would we make the same biased criticisms of her? And would we even realize we were doing so because we are threatened by female leaders? Or would we just kind of let our language and the biases therein sort of automatically dictate our thoughts, right? It's a chicken and egg situation with culture and language. Culture creates language, and then language goes ahead and reinforces culture. So something to think about. And next topic is, what do we notice about these English words? I'll give you a moment to look at them. Okay, you perhaps did notice that the default or the root of all the words is the male form, assuming a masculine normative, right? And the female is always an added. Men will often argue that these words, man, mankind, are inclusive and they include women, and it's silly of us to quibble with them. So if they were really inclusive, then this sentence would sound right. Man is a mammal because he breastfeeds his young. Okay, I don't know about you, but the whole phrase, man breastfeeds, does sound odd and disturbing to me, which would indicate that the term is not really gender conclusive. I'm getting a weird image, something like, right? So let's look at, that was disturbing, so let's look at a study done with children. Children always reveal. They were asked to draw a caveman. And in the study, all of the cavemen who were drawn were male. Because, of course, that is what it actually means to us. There was one child who drew a female. However, the woman was being dragged. So with children and in education, we want to look for gender-neutral words. Doctor and cleaner is much better than female doctor, cleaning woman, right? Instead of mankind, we can just say humanity. The executives and their wives could be the executives and their spouses. And the last example shows a kind of substitution of article for pronoun, which I'm going to get into a little bit more. Each worker had his picture taken can be each worker had a picture taken. Very easy substitution. The two types of citation also are reflective of gender differences. Which one of these is APA citation and which one is MLA? If you guessed that APA was the second one, you are right. And perhaps you did not know that the reason that Gowdy J has been substituted by APA for Gowdy John is that studies showed that when readers knew that the writer was female by looking at the first name, they automatically valued the information and the resource less, right? So if I am reading and I think that it was Jane Gowdy who wrote Avoiding Self-Organized Extinction, then I'm just going to assume, apparently, that she's full of crap. And only when it's John am I going to take it seriously. So the people that revised APA decided to just take the first name out altogether to give us a less biased view when we are referencing. And here are some writing tips for less bias in English. Always try to take the he, she pronoun out and use an article instead, as seen before. The parent who reads to her infant cares for her infant's intellectual growth is easily changed to the parent who reads to an infant. It's good to use, if you have to use pronouns, it's good to alternate them instead of using his all the time to include everyone, because as we have seen, it doesn't really do that. But we don't want to confuse the readers by jumping back and forth. A confusing example below, a young child is often persuaded by advertisements to buy what he sees on television when she goes shopping. She sees. Well, you're talking about the same child. You want to either use she and her throughout or his and her throughout, right? And maybe you don't have to use his and her all the time anymore. Spanish is working also on gender inclusive language and has recently replaced Latino/Latina with Latinx. And actually, fun fact, it is actually Latinx Awareness Month right now. There are some tests that we're going to apply to gender bias in language to see how much there is. I'm going to apply them to English, and then I'll ask you to apply them to one of the other languages that you multilingual people speak. Number one, is there any word that does not have an equivalent for the other gender? You have to kind of sort through your words and think about them. I came up with working mother. There's no equivalent to working mother because, of course, all fathers are just assumed to be working people, right? So that's one. And I thought of another one, a kind of new one, slut shaming. That's really only for females. There is no equivalent to slut shaming for men. They are only encouraged to be proud of their behavior. And the lady is saying, good heavens, it seems that that woman hasn't been home since last night. My screen cuts off a little. Test 2. Is there any category that is described with more words or words of different connotations for one gender than another? Okay, so this one is the second language test. And I used, this is usually the place to go in the language to find the real bias, is to look at promiscuity. The promiscuous woman, there are so many. I didn't even put half. I went to the Urban Dictionary and there were like 10 more. Slut, whore, also hoe, loose, easy, sleazy, fast, tart, fallen, Jezebel, wanton, slack, trollop, harlot. It goes on and on. Of course, you Creole speakers know a few more. And for promiscuous man, I looked and looked and thought, and I thought of player. But is it even a negative word? Can't you be proud of that? And of course, for the BK speakers, there's Joe Grind. But is that negative? Or is that kind of just funny and jokey and something to laugh about? It's not shameful. The female words are really shameful. So they have a whole different connotation. Therefore, English fails the test and reveals itself to be a very biased language. Even though it is a natural gender language instead of a gendered language, it still reveals a lot of bias. For the forum this week, you're going to apply test 1 and 2 to BK or any language that you speak. Those of you who speak a Mayan language or Garifuna, I'm totally encouraging you to apply the test, but you'll probably need to translate your words for me because I don't understand, right? And also just note specially biased words, right? In Spanish, for example, esposas has a double meaning, which shows an inherent bias against women. And make sure that you also categorize the language you are looking at. Remember, there are 3 linguistic categories. Gender neutral means there are no changes in the pronouns or any of the other words. The only words that are male and female are nouns, such as mother, that have to be male or female. So that's gender neutral. Also, it could be gender natural, like English, where the pronouns reflect the gender, but the articles and the nouns do not. And then, of course, the most gendered language is the ones like Spanish, where they have a special gender pronoun and the adjectives have to agree with the nouns, and they're all gendered, right? And hint, when you're looking at your language, just look at the pronouns very carefully, right? And also look and see if you have masculine or feminine articles. And another hint, Creole has changed due to decreolization. Use the Basilic Creole when you are looking at pronoun use, because it is different than the Mesolect and Acrolect Creole that is spoken nowadays. Thanks for watching my video. I hope all of us can be more aware of the effect of the language that we use.